Holy City Center Radio, this is episode 252, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. Just going to state for the record, I love Boeing, no problems with them ever, they're the best, Boeing's great, I would never blow a whistle on them, I would never talk bad about them, I'm just going to say that. For no particular reason at all, as maybe you all should as well. Welcome back to the show. I hope you are having a great week. Weather's been really warm. I haven't done anything exciting, although tonight, when you're listening to this Wednesday, I'm supposed to be going to Firefly Distillery to see Queens of the Stone Age and Royal Blood. Very much looking forward to seeing those bands. Shows at Firefly are kind of unique because it's just a big open field. So, the earlier you get there, obviously the closer you can get to the stage if you want to do that. Otherwise, you might end up a little far back. But, when the weather is nice, especially when the sun goes down on some of these, spring, summer concerts out there, it's pretty nice. Tough to beat. It's a good little venue. I'm saying little, but it's a pretty significant space. I think it's several acres. But in any event, it's a nice space and, a bit of a change of pace from some of the other venues around town. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but it's always nice to have different venues for concerts, because then, with the different crowd sizes, it opens up more opportunities for different, musicians of different levels to show up. So it's been great having Firefly as one of the newer venues and having some acts that maybe wouldn't have come to town otherwise come through. So looking forward to that show. They have a pretty good lineup this year. Their series is already underway. You can go to holycitycenter.com/calendar to see the shows they have coming this year, as well as what other venues in town have as far as events. All right, without any further delay, then, we are going to get into the news. More and more information keeps coming out about that tragic hit and run that happened downtown. And I would venture to say many of us were not expecting this news to come out over the last couple days. I believe it came out on Monday. Not just that there's a second arrest, but that this person is actually the one that police say hit the girls, which changes nothing as far as the charges of hit and run, and for the second person, but maybe just brings up even more questions. And what does this mean for the case now that there's two people? So just shocking news, but here's the details for those who haven't heard it yet. Yes, the second person was indeed arrested in connection with that hit and run crash that happened on Morrison Drive that ultimately killed two 20-year-old women from Simpsonville. Those women, Lizzie Zito and Ariana Gamber, were struck by a second vehicle before. I'm sorry, I should say we found out it's the second vehicle. So two vehicles have hit them. But the person they just arrested, that was actually the vehicle that they say hit the girls before the first person who was arrested also hit them. You may remember earlier this week, Max Gentilin was arrested and charged with several things related to that hit and run, which occurred in the early hours of Sunday, April 28th. Now, the person they just arrested happened on Monday afternoon. That person is 32-year-old Seth Allen Gilbert William Carlson. Yes, there are several middle names in there, it appears. He is from Somerville, and now police say that he is the one who struck the two girls, and about half an hour later, is when Gentilin also hit them. So Carlson's truck was ultimately found abandoned in West Ashley after he crashed into a ditch and ran off. Yes, that was a second crash he had that evening. He is charged with 2 counts of reckless vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. He was being held at Alcana Detention Center. He ended up having a bond hearing on Tuesday afternoon. He posted that $600,000 bond that he was granted. Now, according to affidavits that were provided after Tuesday's hearing, investigators with the Charleston Police Department reviewed video surveillance from the South Carolina Ports Authority, which they said shows the two victims walking north in the pedestrian/bike lane on Morrison Drive when they were struck by a Chevrolet pickup truck around 1:12 a.m. That's the truck belonging to Carlson. And so again, the surveillance videos really help them potentially solve this case, and has helped get a timeline and understanding of what exactly happened in those early morning hours. So now we know that the two girls were in the pedestrian bike lane. So if anybody was wondering, oh, were they in the road, or whatever, they were where they were supposed to be. So they estimate that Carlson, as I said, his Chevrolet truck, the one that he was driving, according to them, hit the girls at 1:12 a.m. The truck then veered out of the travel lane into that pedestrian bike lane. I'm sorry, that's how it started, is when they veered out of the travel lane into the pedestrian bike lane, hitting the two women, and then continued north on Morrison Drive without stopping. After the crash, video from the area showed that the truck sustained damage to the front passenger headlight. So that was another way they could help identify the vehicle later. Now, there's a witness who reported seeing a vehicle driving erratically on Cosgrove Avenue in the North Bridge around 1:22 a.m., which is about 10 minutes after the crash. The truck did not stay in its lane of travel on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard, according to another witness. And shortly thereafter, Carlson had a second crash, as I mentioned, into a ditch off of Sam Rittenberg Boulevard. There was a witness there that had a conversation with Carlson. Now, this is all according to police, so it's all alleged. You know how this stuff goes. He'll have his day in court, but so just making that clear when I say Carlson did this, Carlson did that. This is according to the police report. And obviously, he'll have a chance to defend himself in court, as will the other gentlemen involved in this case. Now, according to this witness, they had a conversation with the man who crashed that truck, who police say is Carlson. And then the witness said that the driver smelled of alcohol and was sweating. So after being located, Carlson's truck was taken to the Charleston Police Department's Forensic Services Lab for further inspection. They found damage on the vehicle, and it's consistent with what was seen on the camera footage from Morrison Drive immediately after the crash, as they looked at this fresh damage on the truck's front passenger side. As I mentioned, police are estimating that about 30 minutes after Carlson hit them, they were struck again by an Acura TL that the aforementioned Max Gentilin had been driving. So just a shocking development when it came across. Now there's these poor women were hit twice, and the person we thought who did it wasn't the first person to hit them. Now, again, there's still so many questions here. Does this change any of the charges with the first person who was arrested? I don't think so. Everything I looked at from the charges would still apply. It's still a hit and run. What's the defense going to be? Did he, now granted, was not driving correctly if he's in that pedestrian lane where these two women are. Did he even see them? Does that matter? Is there any guesses or theories that any of these gentlemen were driving under the influence? It certainly sounds like the person they just arrested, Carlson, that's what they're saying based on witness statements. But how do you prove it after the fact? So there's going to be a lot of those types of questions. There's probably going to be people wondering, were either of the girls, both of them, still alive after that first hit? Is there any way to figure that out? Just tragic questions for sure, some of these, for just a horrible situation that just seems to get worse and worse the more we hear about it. I mean, it was already tragic. There's no doubt about that. But then when you start hearing they might have been hit twice and, that they weren't doing anything wrong, not that it wouldn't have been a tragedy if they were, running across the street when they shouldn't have or something. But it just adds to the tragedy when you realize, they truly seem to have been doing nothing wrong at all, and this happened. So it's just such a sad situation, and there's going to be a lot of developments because it'll be really interesting to see how these court cases play out. I would imagine they're going to have separate trials, of course, and how do those affect each other? This is going to be a story that'll be in the news for quite some time, and I'll be sure to keep you all posted. Going back to my little comment up at the top of the show regarding Boeing, we've talked about them before, how there's been very well documented issues with some of their planes. There's been some whistleblowers commenting about how they might not be doing things appropriately. Two of those whistleblowers have ended up dead within the last month, which, of course, is a story, regardless if there's anything nefarious behind it or not. Well, the news isn't getting better for Boeing, as the Federal Aviation Administration, probably better known as the FAA, said on Monday that it has indeed opened an investigation into Boeing after the company reported that workers at a South Carolina plant falsified inspection records on certain 787 planes. So yes, that's specific to here in South Carolina, that the company is saying workers falsified some records. So Boeing said its engineers have determined that the misconduct did not create what they said was, quote, an immediate safety of flight issue, end quote. I think the signifier of the word immediate there is interesting, because obviously they may be conceding that it may not have been immediately an issue, but certainly could become one. So in an email to Boeing South Carolina employees, Scott Stocker, who leads the 787 program, wrote on April 29th that a worker observed an irregularity in a required test of the wing to body join and reported it to his manager. No planes have been taken out of service, but having to perform the test out of order on planes will certainly slow the delivery of jets that are still being built at the assembly plant here in North Charleston. So when there's issues like that, they've got to obviously fix them in whatever capacity. So it will certainly cause a delay of some sort. Now, the company, as I mentioned, has been under a lot of pressure, although it's been a few years where they've had several issues with Boeing planes of different varieties, different reasonings that you can look into. The pressure kind of picked up when a door plug was blown out of a Boeing 737 MAX during an Alaska Airlines flight this January. You probably remember this. It ended up with the door or panel. The door itself. After that door plug blew out, the door, itself is gone. And so people are thousands of feet in the air with a hole in the side of the plane, essentially. I'm sure you all remember and saw that. And so that's really when things started to pick up steam. And of course, that accident, as it should, led to a halted progress at Boeing. And they were a company that was already, like I said, having other issues, most notably two deadly crashes of MAX jets that happened in 2018 and 2019. So, no surprise the FAA is investigating something here. It's good that Boeing has self-reported something, as whistleblowers were essentially saying that either people weren't reporting things that they knew were wrong, or maybe just didn't know what some of their employees were doing. And, we'll see more about what exactly those accusations are going forward. But so it is good that they self-reported something before it became an issue to, passengers and pilots and anybody who works for the airline that will be on any of these planes. So, I mean, that's all well and good, but it's certainly concerning that they're continuing to have issues despite having a microscope on them. So certainly something to keep an eye on, in addition to all the other problems they're already facing. It's been a tough couple years for Boeing, and it does not appear to be getting any better. A little bit of local politics here. A small group of lawmakers here in the state decided on Tuesday to bring up some legislation as we're getting close to the end of this year's session. So some bills they're trying to rush and get them pushed through before they can no longer be debated or talked about this year, which obviously means they can't be passed. So the bill that they're trying to rekindle would limit how topics like race can be taught in public school classrooms. This would cover kindergarten and 12th grade, of course. This should be no surprise. We've known that some kind of legislation like this has been in the works, and specifically both the House and Senate actually passed bills related to this last year. But because there were two different versions, they have to reconcile that, have a compromise if they're going to pass it. But the two versions just kind of sat dormant in a conference committee. Never had those differences worked out. And just like I referenced with this legislative session coming to an end, when last year's ended, that ended, any chance of that bill moving forward that year. And it hasn't really had much attention to it until all of a sudden, just a few days before things are wrapping up, they decide to bring it back up and try to get it through. So there's 3 House members and 3 senators that are on this committee. They adjourned after an hour of making it just 4 pages into this 16-page handout that discusses the differences between the proposals. So they're trying to work their way through it, trying to remove stuff that's maybe one side of the chamber disagrees with, or add stuff, and so they're trying to work out those details. But there is that deadline I mentioned, as the regular session will end this Thursday. So that's what we're, looking at as far as if this has a chance of moving forward or not. Now, there is a chance that it could survive into a special session in June, because a version of this bill did pass in both chambers. So it's one of these silly, there's so many silly rules and procedures in Senates and House of Representatives, whether it's the federal level or state levels. And you're going to learn about another crazy thing that just happened at the State House related to that. So it's confusing, but there is still a chance that even if they don't have a compromise by the deadline on Thursday, it could still be brought up in a special session. So we'll worry about that if it happens. So far, the Senate has removed a provision requiring teachers to post any changes to their plans on what they will teach and any classroom materials 3 days before the lessons. They also removed another provision that would allow parents to sue any district in the state that they think is teaching prohibited concepts, even while they follow the school's appeal process. So, they could bring up something, essentially say, I think this is inappropriate that's being taught. And then while that is working through the process, they originally were going to be allowed to sue any district in the state during that time frame. So those both have been removed. Now, it should be pointed out, and I believe I talked about this in past episodes, that the bill basically just copies a section that was originally put in the state budget 3 years ago. And that says that schools are prohibited from teaching that one race is superior to another, or that race can determine someone's moral character. A right that shouldn't be taught in schools, and we talked about before, it's not, of course, and it's illegal already to teach racist concepts, such as those very specific examples they gave. This is a waste of time. This is already a thing you can't do. But okay. Now, the proposal does have an appeal process for material that parents find objectionable, but the Senate version limits the right to complaints to just students, parents, employees, or volunteers in the school district where the objectionable items are found. I think that needs to be the limit if this is going to be something that ultimately passes. We don't need, some person in another state trying to cause problems by submitting all these things saying South Carolina schools in this district are teaching things they're not supposed to, when that person doesn't live or work or have students in the district. It doesn't make any sense. So it should be limited to that district, but we'll see what, the sides ultimately agree upon. Now, you're probably wondering, Christian, you haven't said critical race theory at any point in this. Isn't that what this is all about? Yes, but of course, it's not really about that. And the way you know that is because the phrase critical race theory is not even in the bills. That phrase just is non-existent. One of the reasons for that is critical race theory is a graduate level theory course that is not taught in any high school anywhere in this country, or any elementary school or middle school. It's not taught. It became a catch-all term for essentially things that a certain segment of the population doesn't like, and they would just call it critical race theory. So that's why that specific phrase is not listed there, because it was already not taught in the schools, and it's not really about that very specific topic. It's this broader spectrum of things that people are trying to get removed. Now, it instead says that they're trying to prevent teaching that an individual, quote, bears responsibilities for actions committed in the past, end quote, by other members of their race, and that someone is inherently privileged or would receive, quote, adverse or favorable treatment, end quote, because of their race. Again, I don't think any teachers were trying to ever tell people that they bear any responsibility for something their ancestors did, but that's not really what it's about. It's more about they can twist that definition to say something like, if a teacher decides to talk about reparations, for instance, not even in a political way saying they agree or disagree, just talking about them. They could twist that and be like, oh, it shouldn't be taught because reparations is like basically telling people who live today that they need to make up for something that's not their fault. And, you see what I'm saying? Like all of a sudden topics can very easily get twisted to fit these somewhat broad definitions. That's what this is all about. That again, that's why critical race theory is not in there. They want to prevent any kind of mention of things of that nature, equity, inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see if this ends up getting pushed out or not. A sponsor of the bill, Republican Representative Adam Morgan, didn't. And this is another reason why this is all a bunch of crap. He didn't even give specific examples of what he claimed was happening in schools when he said he'd heard about teachers who have taught one race is superior or that they should bear responsibility for what was done in the past. So when he said he's heard about that, he wouldn't give any specific examples such as the school or where he heard this, probably because it's not true. It would be my guess. That's just my opinion. If you're not going to give a specific example, it's probably not true. And let's hope this silly bill doesn't get pushed through because it's already illegal to teach racist concepts. And this is just a way to try to bring in other topics that some just don't want to be taught in schools. But there's nothing wrong with them being taught in schools as long as they're done so accurately in in a historical context. You guys all get this, but so I'll keep you posted if this bill ends up getting pushed through or not. And, this shouldn't be a surprise, but South Carolina politics, they always go low. And when they have the opportunity to do so, a lot of the politicians will take the low road. And some people are definitely accusing one person of doing exactly that. So you may know about this energy bill that's being talked about. It's currently in the Senate. They're not too sure what's going to happen with it. There's been a lot of arguments regarding the bill. Now, someone in the House used an obscure rule to end up reviving that bill and try to bolster the measure, at the expense of some other pieces of legislation. And we'll get into all of those. But one of the ones that was in the news is that this would come at the expense of a suicide prevention measure. So here's what's going on. The Senate, as I mentioned, has been kind of hesitant to debate what's called the South Carolina Energy Security Act. You can look up more information on this. It's H5118. So, State Representative Bill Sandifer, who is a Republican from Seneca, used a little-known rule on Wednesday, that's Wednesday of last week, to attach the energy bill to a Senate suicide prevention measure, which is S408. That maneuver upset several Democrats who were shocked by the tactic and insisted that their colleague should not be playing politics with the lives of people who struggle with suicide ideation. Despite that, the House voted 62 to 48 to adopt the amendment, and it is poised to send the bill back to the Senate with the entirety of the House energy bill attached. So basically, the thought process was we'll attach this bill that the Senate doesn't really seem to want to bring up to important bills that they likely will pass easily. Who's not going to want to pass a suicide prevention measure? But now, because this other bill is attached to it, that means they have to consider that bill as well. So by basically saying, hey, we know these are important to you, you plan on discussing these, we're going to throw this energy bill in there to basically force you to acknowledge it and to vote on it. Of course, the Senate could take the move of, no, you've added an unrelated bill. We're going to vote this down because this bill shouldn't be attached to it, which, of course, then leads to the suicide prevention measure not going through either. So it's just a ridiculous tactic. And yes, this has been done before, but usually not. You don't see this happening again with, as some of the Democrats said, with a measure that has to do with people's lives, And by that, I mean, obviously any legislation could affect someone's life, but as far as life or death, literal life or death type of legislation, it seems kind of a despicable thing to do. And Sandifer doesn't seem to have an issue with what he did. Of course, that's why he did it. But even after being confronted with people's complaints about this, he basically just said, hey, the Senate refused to take up this bill. And in continuing to do that, the only way I can get their attention is to take one of their bills that they sent to us and attach this bill to it. So just like I said, just trying to get this measure brought up in a really disgusting way. So in addition to attaching the energy bill to the suicide prevention one, he also attached it to other top measures, including cancer coverage on firefighters' insurance, fighting financial crimes, and the duties of organizations that assist independent pharmacies. So all things that could very much affect people's lives in a significant way. Again, a life or death type thing, depending on funding and whatnot. They attach this energy bill to it in a move that will either get their stupid energy bill passed that they want passed. And I just say stupid in this context because of how they're approaching this whole thing. They'll either just have to get it passed. They're forcing the Senate to pass it, which is never a good look, and is rarely good for, to see the chamber taking a measure like that. Or the Senate will have to reject these bills that are really, really important because they don't want something else attached to it. It's just typical South Carolina politics. And as usual, they're playing with people's lives and livelihood and don't seem to care about the consequences whatsoever. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode. And also a big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I will speak to you all again on Friday. I can't wait until then, but unfortunately, I have to bid you adieu. Until Friday, good night and good luck.